Howdy folks, today we're going to be talking about phenylpropenes, phenylpropanoids, aldehydes, and pretty much just benzyne ring structures that are phenolic acids. So even tannic acids, terpenes, and you have to be careful though because some of these are poisonous. And also some of them are psychoactive, some of them exert a stimulant effect, some of them exert a hallucinatory effect, and we're going to try to show the difference between all of these. Trimethoxyphenethylamine, which is the chemical inside of peyote. But first, we're going to talk about norepinephrine, which is it's an amine that is created in the human central nervous system, but really the central nervous system of all mammalian creatures. Now, this is, it's pretty much this, it's a stimulant that's endogenous to our brain. It's adrenaline. Adrenaline, its entire use in evolution is to motivate human beings and to stimulate our productivity in a sense, and also to help us flee animals or help us to problem solve. But we're going to look at the chemical structure of methamphetamine. If you look at the chemical structure of methamphetamine, you see that it is very similar to the chemical structure of adrenaline. And that is technically the reason why methamphetamine is speed, is because it tripwires the adrenaline receptor and it gets locked inside of the gut biome is what I meant to say there. And from there, we're going to look at another substance that is called phenethylamine. Phenethylamine is found inside of cacao that was grown in Central and South America. The Native Americans, the Mayans and Aztecs there, use phenethylamine almost similar to the way that we use coffee or caffeine. Phenethylamine is a central nervous system stimulant that only has the subjective effect of lasting for around an hour and a half. So, unlike caffeine, which does exert a psychoactive effect that lasts for at least 2 to 3 hours, phenethylamine is an endogenous substance that is probably the precursor of adrenaline in our brain. And what it is, and when you use it, the body knows how to break it down, because the body will break down phenethylamine through the same process that the body breaks down adrenaline. Yet, when you use methamphetamine, the entire goal is to try to make it so that the adrenaline or the adrenaline mimicker cannot be broken down. So now we're going to talk about phenylpropenes and phenylpropanoids because they are very similar structurally to phenethylamine and adrenaline. And so a phenylpropene is different than a phenylpropanoid because a phenylpropanoid is a carboxylic acid, and so that means that the ester's oxygen is bonded with a hydrogen. So now, phenylpropene, those are aldehydes. Aldehydes are when a ketone bonds to the carbon of a hydrogen. And so what that means is that phenylpropenes are broken down in temperatures of heat that are very low compared to phenylpropanoids, which are broken down in higher temperatures. Now, phenylpropanoids are, when you use them, like cinnamonic acid is a good example of a phenylpropanoid. They are more psychoactive, exerting an effect that is very similar to phenethylamine as an essential nervous system stimulant. Hydroxycinnamonic acid is one of the most potent, and you can find this, obviously, in cinnamon, which would make a lot of sense, you know. But you also have other substances like eugenol that's found inside of allspice, something people use to make pumpkin pies. You have phenylenedione, which is... it's used everywhere nowadays in diet sodas. So we're looking at cinnamonic acid here, and if you just look at the structure of it, you can tell that it's very similar to phenethylamine, but it is not an amine, it is an acid. And so therefore, you would have to use higher amounts of cinnamonic aldehyde to exert a central nervous system stimulant effect. Which is, it's very interesting the fact that nature creates these benzyne alley structures that exert a stimulant effect on the central nervous system. It almost kind of seems like they're trying to get us hooked on these plants. And cinnamonic acid, if I were to tell you, I have used large quantities of cinnamonic acid, and it does have the effect of central nervous system stimulation. It's very similar to phenethylamine is pretty much all I'd have to say. Now we're going to look at a phenylpropene, and these, like I said, are broken down in less heat. A phenylpropene, that was safrole that we were just looking at. Now, safrole is used to make methyldioxymethamphetamine, which is known as MDMA, what the kids are calling ecstasy. Safrole is found inside of the sassafras tree. Now, safrole, in and of itself, you have to understand, since it's not a phenylpropanoid, and it also is it is less durable of a substance. The way that chemists make it into something that is durable is they turn it from a phenylpropene into an amine, because amines or alkaloids are more potent than phenylpropanoids. But let's say you were even able to convert safrole to a phenylpropanoid, the likelihood of it exerting any type of central nervous system effect is much higher, and what I just said there is probably literally gonna destroy the youth of America. Anyway, alright, so apple is a substance that looks very similar to bromo dragonfly, and it's a little bit toxic. Aerosone is the same way. It has a very interesting structure that's not just a central nervous system stimulant. Chavicle literally looks just like phenethylamine, pretty much. It's phenylpropanoid. Dill apple looks very similar to bromo dragonfly and LSD and other substances like that. Elemicin is... So now, like I promised, I'm going to go through many different kinds of phenylpropanoids and phenylpropenes that are existing in nature. Alright, so now we're going to talk about methyl-eugenol. And it's found in over 450 species of plants, and it's amazing. It's found inside of allspice and cinnamon in small quantities. It's dimethoxypropylbenzene. If you look at it, it's very similar to phenethylamine. As you can see, it's a benzyne ring with an alley chain. It is not an amine, though, and I also think that it does have some structural similarities to mescaline. If you were to look at the structure of mescaline, it is very similar, but also not similar in a way. It is missing many key components of mescaline that make it a 5-HT2A receptor antagonist. And so the experience of methyl-eugenol, if you were someday ever to obtain large quantities of it, would most likely be just a central nervous system stimulant. But if you took large enough quantities, maybe that of 700 to 600 milligrams, then it could exert probably unpleasant hallucinatory effects. And so we're going to move on from methyl-eugenol because it's pretty much a useless substance besides being a central nervous system stimulant. It is a phenylpropanoid too. I wanted to... So apple is found inside of parsley, and it's found inside of a few other substances as well, or plants. And apple is, if you look at the structure of it, very similar to safrole, very similar to mescaline as well, and other substances like 2CB or bromo dragonfly. But the thing is I had an experience with a substance very similar to dill apple. It's actually just a slightly different substance called dill apple found inside of dill seed. And let me tell you, it was very hallucinogenic. It was one of the most hallucinogenic experiences that I've ever had in my entire life. Very similar to that of LSD mixed with MDMA, being that it is a central nervous system stimulant and a 5-HT2A receptor. But it was very toxic and poisonous, and I had a hangover that lasted for probably 2 days. Very, very unpleasant hangover where I had the worst migraine of my entire life. And like I said, in the olden times, it was used as a way for people to abort their children. So you take that for what you will. Now we've got myristicin from nutmeg. Now, out of all of the phenylpropanoids that have been used for human ingestion, this is probably one of the safer ones, being that it's still very toxic, but it's still also one of the safer ones. And myristicin is a very interesting substance. If you actually mix myristicin with hydrobromic acid, you get MMDMA, which is a substance very similar to MDMA. And it's all just out of a simple acid-base reaction. Now, myristicin is hallucinogenic in and of itself. And I've had experiences with nutmeg. I've extracted nutmeg and ate nutmeg, and it's one of the more pleasant things that I've ever done in my entire life. Don't get me wrong, it'll give you a hangover for a day, but it is nowhere near as toxic as apple. Alright, now we got aerosone from sweet flag. Sweet flag is a plant that's found inside of Canada. And this is a plant that has been used by indigenous people in a sort of medicinal ritualistic way, which leads me to believe that they might actually know a thing or two about this. Now, the tradition of shamanism comes from Siberia, where the Native Americans came from, the ancient native people of the Mongolian mountain range that migrated here 40,000 years ago. They know they've been using peyote, that's a trimethoxyphenethylamine. So I wouldn't be surprised. I always go by the insight of indigenous cultures because they know, because they've been here for longer than us and they've had more experience with these plants than us. And I've read that this plant is used, but I've also read that this plant could be 100% totally toxic. And so if I were you, I would do your own research on that because I've never even touched this stuff before. So here is methyl isoeugenol, very interesting, found inside of sweet basil, but in a few other things as well. Now, I don't know if I actually had a psychoactive experience because of this, but I have ingested sweet basil before. Sweet basil contains very many substances that look just like phenethylamine, and this substance has some similarities with trimethoxy phenethylamine, but so now we're going to move on to anthol. Anthol is found inside of star anise, but it's also found inside of a few other things, and it is primarily responsible for the black licorice-like smell and taste of star anise. And it's found in fennel as well, and fennel is another spice. And you find that a lot of these phenylpropanoid substances, these benzyme ring structures with alley chains, are found inside of different spices. And spices usually have a smell and a taste to them, and that is sort of the reason why they have a smell and a taste to them. I always found this funny as a psychedelic user, that the idea that if you ingest tastes and smells, that you can see, smell, and taste. And I know that a lot of people don't understand what I just said there, but if you're a fucking crazy hippie like me, you probably do. And so anthol is very interesting. Very, very interesting. But here's chavicle. Here's another substance found inside of sweet basil. And like I said, I have ingested sweet basil before, and sweet basil has a stimulant effect. It contains furolic acid, which is a cinnamic acid or a phenylpropanoid, and it also contains 2 phenylpropenes. And so you can only imagine that just like cannabis with many different types of cannabinoids, CBD interacting with tetrahydrocannabinoid, chavicle and the phenylpropene and the phenylpropanoids, when you ingest the sweet basil plant, it gives you the stimulant effect through the pathway of all of those substances working off each other in a kind of a harmonious type of way. And so now we're going to move on from this, chavicle and sweet basil, to, what is this called? Terpene. I don't know what this is from. It's essential oils of the genus Crowea. It's a phenylpropanoid insecticide. Now, if you hear the word insecticide, yeah, Crowea, this is the plant. If you hear a word insecticide, you might not want to ingest it, but this is a scientific video showing you all of the different kinds of phenylpropanoids. So this substance does look similar to saffron, but I don't know about the oxygen and the carbon and hydrogen. I don't know if that makes it toxic. This is found inside of piper and betel, and it's a phenylpropanoid. It's actually one of the more potent ones. It's a chavabetel. Anyway, it's very similar to phenethylamine and mescaline if you look at its chemical structure. Okay. Alright, folks, and this is elemicin, one of the more actually useful one of these phenylpropanoids. This is one of the lesser toxic ones, and it's found inside of the elemi tree, which grows in places in the Far East. So this is one of my favorite ones. It's also found in nutmeg. Nutmeg is a real interesting substance because it contains myristicin and elemicin, and they both are hallucinogenic. Myristicin being more similar to saffron and MDMA, and elemicin being more similar to mescaline. And so the potential for use amongst this is very, very, very high, and it's one of the more interesting substances that has ever been found inside of plants. It's also a completely legal hallucinogen, is another thing that people don't understand about it. Here's estradiol. It's found inside of anise, fennel, sweet basil, found in pure turpentine mixtures. It is most definitely similar to phenethylamine and other stimulants of that nature. And I would like to say that it's very interesting, and I don't think anyone's ever really given this a shot before, but it's very similar to eugenol and methyl eugenol. Holy moly, check that out. It's eugenol. We were just talking about eugenol. Eugenol is found inside of many different things, but probably the most known thing is that it's found inside of is cinnamon. And it's also found in bay leaf and basil and all different kinds of things, but as you can tell, This is definitely a phenethylamine like skeleton backbone, but it has some similarities with mescaline, and I have no idea what that would result, like how that would affect the psychoactive state of things, because I have never had an experience with it. Now we're on a dill apple, my favorite substance. Not. So dill apple is very similar to just apple in general, but I thought that this substance looked like something I've seen in like Alexander Shulgin, like phenethylamine books. Like it reminded me of 2CB and a few other substances, a little bit like mescaline, a little bit like MDMA. But here's the thing, is that something about this substance makes it extremely toxic. And I mean, I'll be honest with you guys, I hallucinated balls. It was just like an acid trip when I took this substance. But the thing is that I had a hangover for almost 2 days, it felt like. And so like, of course, like, somebody's got to be willing to guinea pig for this type of stuff, and I guinea pigged, and it's hallucinogenic, but one of the safer phenylpropanoids that you're allowed to use before you actually get fucked up is actually myristicin, and even people with myristicin have reported hangover effects, so always be careful. Alrighty guys, now we're on to the variety hour of the show, where we're going to talk about aldehydes. Vanillin is an aldehyde. And vanillin has been mixed with phenethylamine to produce very, 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 very strong psychoactive effects. And as to the reason why that exists, I have no idea. Now we're on apple cider vinegar. When you let alcohol turn into vinegar, it creates organic phenylpropanoids like acetic acid, citric acid, gallic acid. Gallic acid is a very interesting aldehyde, but it also creates p-cumaric acid and caffeic acid, which there's phenylpropanoids, there's tannins, and tannins are benzyne ring structures that are used as antioxidants sometimes, but they're also a little bit toxic and taken in higher doses. So yeah, we're looking at this here, and so flavonoids and terpenes and diterpenes are also a part of this benzyne ring structure. Most psychoactive substances do have a benzyne ring as their most basic skeletal formula. And so caffeoquinic acid is found inside of dogwood. And it's a very interesting substance, but it is very similar to a aldehyde, and it's also similar to some phenylpropenes, and it does exert an anti-inflammatory effect, which many substances that are, phenyl benzyne ring structures do. Now you've got gallic acid. And gallic acid is a aldehyde found inside of staghorn sumac, but it is one of the most basic, I would say, benzyne ring aldehyde structures that doesn't have an alley chain, but has exerted some psychoactive effects in human beings. Alright, now we're going to look at the terpenes and diterpenes and sesquiterpenes, which are phenyl structures, but usually they're more complex. Now, the diterpene, I forgot what the name of the substance is inside of salvia divinorum, but, it's salvinorin A. Salvinorin A is a very interesting, very psychoactive substance that actually exerts its psychoactivity through the K-opioid kappa receptors, which is funny because most opioid receptors release dopamine, and this substance just makes you hallucinate and think that the ground is trying to pull you down into hell. You've got limonene, which exerts a very, 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 very smelly effect. It's similar to pinene, which terpenes are pretty much just benzyne rings with no alley chain structures, and so they're not even aldehydes. They're not, or phenylpropenes. They're just benzyne rings that are kind of free-floating, and these benzyne rings are often very aromatic. Many very smelly things have terpenes in them, like marijuana, for example. The terpenes are they play the role in the pine tree / lemony smell of cannabis. So that's something that you need to know. And limonene comes from lemons. Alpha-pinene comes from pine trees. I mean, it's kind of in the name, you can tell. But turpentine that comes from pine trees is highly flammable, these benzyne ring structures. In the 1800s, people used to use turpentine as a cure-all for colds and for all this stuff. Nowadays, it says that if you do that, then you're risking your health because it's toxic. But this old folkloric medicine has at least a grain of truth to it in the way that it most likely was an anti-inflammatory type of an effect that alpha-pinene had on people who were sick. And alpha-pinene is found in cannabis as well. And so now we're going to be on the myrcene, which is found inside of mangoes. And mangoes are pretty interesting, and you know, it smells really good. It's one of the better smelling terpenes. Oh, it's found inside of cannabis a lot too. Can't forget about the terpenes inside of grapefruit. Fucking hell, I just took it out. Anyway, guys, you have a good one. Thanks for watching my video.